evening and welcome to tonight's debate for the seats of Willoughby and the seat of North Shore. This is the first in a number of events that the Jewish Board of Deputies will be putting on leading up to the March state election. My name is David Oscar and I'm President of the Board. I'd like to begin this evening by acknowledging the Cunragal people, the original owners of the land on which we stand, and by paying my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to thank each of the candidates here tonight. We know how busy this time of the political cycle is and the amount of events and organisations which are competing for your time. So the fact that you've given up this evening to join us here and to share your thoughts leading up to the election with the community is something we don't take for granted. I'd like to introduce each of the candidates. We have Felicity Wilson, who is the current member for North Shore, and obviously the Liberal candidate for North Shore. We've got Tim James, who is the current member for the seat of Willoughby, and will be the Liberal candidate for Willoughby. We've got Sarah Griffin on the end. Hi Sarah. She's the Labor candidate for Willoughby. We've got Godfrey Santer, who is the Labor candidate for North Shore. And finally, we've got Helen Conway, who is the independent candidate for the seat of North Shore. Thank you to each of you for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, the format for this evening will be as follows. I'll shortly hand over to Darren Bark, who is the board's CEO and who will moderate this evening's event. Each candidate will have the opportunity to present some opening remarks and give an overview as to why they are deserving of your vote. Our moderator will then ask a number of questions which you have sent through for discussion and debate. And then at the end of the evening, each candidate will have the opportunity to offer some conclusion remarks. I've also just noticed that Marjorie O'Neill MP, the member for Coogee, is in the audience. Marjorie, you must really enjoy politics. tonight, but it's always good to see you. So with that, I'll close. Before I do though, I actually just want to acknowledge North Shore Temple Emmanuel and to thank their leadership for your hospitality in hosting us here this evening, and in particular Julia Selby for your work and assistance in making tonight possible. With that, I will hand over to our moderator, Darren Bark. I hope you enjoy this evening. I hope you find it informative. I hope you get a better understanding of each candidate. And more than anything, I hope you have respect for the people here we have on this stage. Putting yourself up for election is not easy. It's tough, it's demanding, you're under constant scrutiny, but ultimately our society and our polity is better for great people like what we've got up here tonight, offering their hands and offering themselves up for candidacy. So each of you, thank you for being here, thank you for your contribution to the political system. I'll now hand over to Darren. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, David. We're really in for a treat. We're very obviously pleased to have all of our candidates here tonight for 2 seats of Willoughby and North Shore. And I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of land, past, present and emerging. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining us tonight, and also those that will be watching this on a delayed broadcast. It's really important that we get these information sessions, the opportunity for the community to ask their questions, to get their answers from their candidates, and we make that available in a very rich and diverse way. This is part of our election series, as David outlined, the first as part of our election series. So this is the inaugural one for this particular election. We also have a town hall with Dominic Perrottet, who's obviously the Premier of New South Wales, and the Leader of the Opposition, Chris Minns, on the 22nd of February with the Premier and the 27th with the Opposition Leader. And concluding with Vaucluse and Coogee on the 8th of March. And also just to acknowledge the member for Coogee who's here tonight. So that will be simulcast on Sky News, the 2 leader debates. And so please make a note of that. It's going to be a really fantastic series that will be made available as a collection for people to watch and to inform their decision making when it comes to the election at the end of March. Can I also just thank this beautiful venue. We're very fortunate to have it, but also the people who put this together and make it possible. So thank you to North Shore Temple Emmanuel. We've got a lot of questions that have already come in that have been submitted online, and you can continue to submit your questions. They will pop up on this very sophisticated setup over here, and we will get those questions to our candidates. You can select who you'd like it directed at. However, of course, we're going to give everybody an opportunity to answer them. So use the QR code to make sure that we're fully inclusive. If you feel more comfortable to fill that out in a paper format, please raise your hand. A staff member will bring you a piece of paper, and you can submit it that way as well. So David's introduced our candidates. We have actually done a random draw in terms of who will be able to present first, but we will reverse that order for the closing statements to be absolutely impartial and fair. With that, can I just ask you to turn your phones on silent before we begin? So we're going to welcome our candidates. The first candidate that we're going to hear from tonight is Sarah Griffin, who is the Labor candidate for Willoughby. We're going to give each candidate 2 minutes to give some opening remarks, and then we'll move into questions. So if Sarah, you'd like to say a few comments?
Sure.
Just for the AV, that would be fantastic.
Yes. So, thank you. Green button. Yes. I've got that. I'm not very technical. I'd like to acknowledge the Camaragal people, the traditional owners of the land we gather on today. I pay my respects to their elders past and present. I support an Indigenous voice to Parliament, and I support the Uluru Statement from the Heart. And thank you so much for inviting me to be here. It's an absolute pleasure. So I'm probably not as well known as my fellow candidates because I'm relatively new to politics. So I'll give you a potted quick history. So I've lived in Willoughby 20 years with my husband and my 2 children, and we're very committed to this community. Professionally, I started off as a physiotherapist in the public hospital system, but I now have a second career as a health economist, very niche. That I've had a number of roles, both nationally and internationally, mainly focusing on health finance, health economics, and medical technology. But now I run my own health economics consulting company here in Willoughby. So policy-wise, I'm absolutely committed to preserving and improving our natural environment and combating climate change. So that's a big one for me. Also, I'm extremely concerned about the pay and conditions of our essential workers in this electorate. So that includes nurses, teachers, allied health, bus drivers, cleaners. So many of them are leaving because the conditions are actually just too difficult for them to stay. And so I'm very happy that Labor is committed to ending the wage cap, and we undertake to negotiate fairly with these people. Secondly, education. I believe that education is a public good that elevates the spirit and well-being of the entire community. So I'm really happy to let you all know that the Labor, slip of the tongue there, Labor opposition has committed to $10 million of funding to upgrade Camaragal and Northbridge schools, which is sorely needed. And finally, I love that Willoughby is such a diverse community, and I'm committed to a successful, multicultural, multi-faith society because it's enriching for all of us, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion tonight. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah. So we'll now move to Tim James, who is the Liberal member for Willoughby.
Well, thanks very much, Darren. To you, David, Jacqueline, Julia, the leadership here, everyone, my fellow candidates, it's terrific to be with you and those watching online. Thank you for having me along. It's a great joy to share in this opportunity. And tonight, we are in Willoughby. Welcome to Willoughby, everyone, my fellow candidates. It's terrific to host you. And this is a precious local institution. I know I grew up only a few streets from here on Penshurst Street. I used to catch the bus on Macquarie Street. I know Temple Emmanuel, I've visited in recent times, came here for a fantastic concert and enjoyed, I should say, a magnificent supper and company right in this room afterwards. So I'm, as you know, still relatively new in my parliamentary career, not even 12 months in the job as yet, but we've worked extremely hard across Willoughby. I've laid out a positive vision and plan for Willoughby to make it an even better place to live, work and raise a family. So among the commitments to live up to those visions and expectations are 2 new schools in this electorate. So in addition to rebuilding and adding to all the existing schools, including $250 million at Chatswood High and Chatswood Public, 2 new schools, one in St Leonard's Gore Hill and another in Chatswood to meet the needs of this electorate. Obviously ensuring that Royal North Shore Hospital, a world-class hospital, is able to grow to meet the healthcare needs of our community. On public transport, this government has invested more than just about any other in public transport. The metro, obviously, with stations in Chatswood and Crow's Nest, will benefit this community immeasurably. And then there's roads, getting the balance right to find ways to get people from this area and right across Sydney, in a city of 6 million people, from A to B more safely and effectively. And then our precious natural environment, to ensure our green space is preserved and indeed added to over time. And that is such an important commitment for this local community. So I believe in the long-term economic plan that Dominic Perrottet has laid out. It is the only way that we can provide those essential services that people have come to know and expect from this government. And getting the finances right and the budget right is so important, particularly in these challenging economic times. I look forward to your questions. Thanks again for having me along.
Thank you, Tim. We'll now move to Helen Conway, who is the independent candidate for North Shore.
Thanks very much. Welcome everybody tonight. I'm delighted to be here and thanks for your hospitality and thanks for giving up your evening to listen to all of us speak to you. I've been a resident of the North Shore electorate for 28 years. I'm very committed to the electorate. I've also worked long and hard. As you can see, I'm not young. And I come to politics later on in life after 30 odd years in business. I've worked in the community sector, I've worked in the commercial sector, and I've worked in the government sector. I've spent 30 years doing that as a board chair, a board director, a senior executive and lawyer. I've got a strong track record of getting the job done, particularly in areas of diversity and inclusion. I believe well-adjusted societies embrace these concepts just as we need to embrace the Uluru Statement and the Voice. I've done a lot of community work, I have to say, in relation to women primarily. I've set up the Women's Legal Resources Centre. I've run a halfway house for released women prisoners. I've been an ambassador for Habitat Women. I've chaired Women for Election Australia, which is a non-partisan organisation which trains women to stand for public office at local, state and federal levels. And I've chaired the YWCA, which is an organisation that provides housing, homelessness services and domestic violence services for women. So having done all that, I feel that I'd like now to have a shot at doing something more effective right in the middle of politics. So what tipped me over the edge? What tipped me over the edge was the lack of integrity in politics in New South Wales. The two-party system doesn't work anymore. The two-party system does not put community at the centre of its decision-making. That's why I'm standing. And in North Shore, we have many, many local issues. I've spent the last 2 months talking to many, many community groups in North Shore. I understand their issues, and at absolutely the heart of all these issues is a sense in the community that they are disregarded, that indeed they're treated with contempt. I aim to rectify that problem when I'm elected. So thanks very much for tonight. I'll welcome comments from my colleagues, and I certainly would welcome all your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Godfrey.
Thank you, Darren, and thank you for the Jewish Board of Deputies for inviting me here tonight. I'm delighted to be here. I'd like to think that my great-grandmother would, if she were around, she'd be seeing me here and thinking that I've come back to the Mother Faith. I also acknowledge that we are on Camaragal land and acknowledge the leaders past, present and emerging, and pay my respects to them. Just a quick few words on my training and work experience. I was educated in Melbourne and studied economics at university there. I had 20 years in public service in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade with overseas postings in Asia, Middle East and Europe. I came to Sydney to become Deputy Managing Director of the Australian Tourist Commission, so for a while I was responsible for worldwide marketing of Australia as a tourism destination. I've started up and I've run my own business, which I sold for profit. And I've been chair of our Residential Building Owners Corporation, chair of a precinct in North Sydney, and the precinct system is a very important aspect of community input into the policy making of a council, and I'm currently Deputy Mayor at North Sydney Council. I came here wanting to come to this meeting and absolutely delighted that I was invited, because I am concerned about religious and racial discrimination, and I'd like to. I'm proud of the record which the Labor Party has in introducing the Racial Discrimination Act, and in 1995 banning racial hate speech. Also in State Parliament in 1977 we introduced the Anti-Discrimination Act, and the current federal Labor government has referred the issue of discrimination against gay students and teachers et al. To the Australian Law Reform Commission. And we pledge our support for all faith-based communities and for the invaluable work that they do in support of their communities and indeed for the community at large. Our leader Chris Mintz has publicly avowed that eliminating anti-Semitism in all its forms is critically important, and that security funding has always been a non-partisan issue. We will always work with the Liberals to ensure the Jewish community feels safe. That was a direct quote from what he said. Another reason I'm wanting to run is because we are concerned at what we consider to be a lack of attention to local community attitudes and concerns, particularly the environmental damage that's being done at the moment with the Warringah Freeway Beaches Link project, the high density property development alongside lack of public space, infrastructure, clock roads, toll roads, which we're the most expensive toll road city in the world, unaffordable housing. Our two main industries in the North Shore area are nursing and health, and yet the workers who are generally at the lower paid spectrum just can't afford to live in the area that they work in. The poor resourcing of public schools and TAFE, privatisation of public transport, buses, ferries, marginalisation of local government, and I have personal experience of that being on the council, and the pork barrelling to jobs for the boys. We intend to work hard in all of those areas to remedy those problems and ensure that with a Labor government that we will bring about a much more progressive, community-focused government. Thank you.
Thank you, Godfrey, and Felicity Wilson.
Thank you very much, Darren. Thank you, David, and especially thank you to you, Julia. I want to also acknowledge the Cammeraygal people whose country we're on today, and I get to live and work and raise my children on Cammeraygal country every single day, and I think today, particularly with it being National Apology Day, I was reflecting coming here today about the lessons that we learn from history and the synergy with the lessons we learn from the history of the Jewish people as well, and the fact that we need to be vigilant forever about the way in which we've treated people in the past, so that we embed those learnings into the future. And I want to thank the Board of Deputies. I really enjoyed the past couple of years working with Vic Hamilton and legislating against racial vilification and incitement of violence, and also more recently with you working on the legislation to ensure that we ban Nazi symbols. There's more for us to do, but I do appreciate working hand in hand with the Jewish community on some of these reforms. So thank you for that. For those of you I haven't had a chance to meet personally, my name is Felicity, as you know, and I am the Liberal member for North Shore, and I've been there for a term and a half. And at my heart, I'm probably just a local mum in many ways. I've got two very small children. They're both at daycare age. And getting into politics for me was mostly about wanting to make a difference locally for my community, wanting to make a difference to the world we live in. And I think having children as a sitting MP and during my term of Parliament has really sharpened that connection I feel to my local community and its needs and what it really cares about, but also thinking about the intergenerational impacts both here and around the globe. And so for me that drives a lot of what I do. I mean, I have to think about getting my kids the juggle for daycare, affording daycare, you know, I rent, I'm a single mother, I've got to juggle all of those challenges, and in many ways I'm more fortunate than many other people, but at least I understand many of those challenges, which gives me a really sharp sense of what the community needs as well. I really care about the needs of our community when it comes to things like how reliant we are on public transport, how young people like me are trying to get on the housing ladder, and increasingly are even struggling to find rental properties or to find affordable rental properties, for instance. So I'm really in tune because that's what I live and breathe every single day, and I listen to my community to hear about their concerns and make sure I'm working on their behalf, and I've done that consistently through my time. I also care a lot about the future. That's one of the reasons I'm proud to be a Liberal, because we are the leading government and jurisdiction in Australia on addressing climate change. We have the most progressive targets for emissions reduction. We've also been independently recognised by WWF for having the best renewable energy policies in Australia. And you know, we've had record-leading increases in national park estate, for instance. That's under a Liberal government. But I also think that there are significant economic challenges facing us as well, and particularly young people like myself face those challenges. But I'm really positive about the future of New South Wales and about North Shore. I think that although there are challenges out there, although there are harbingers, we actually have a really great opportunity here in our state to continue to thrive and to create more opportunities for the future. And that might be building on some of the work we've done as a government. No one here would be surprised to learn that we have a record level of infrastructure investment. You've never seen more infrastructure investment in the history of Australia than you have in New South Wales under Liberals. And that includes a record level of infrastructure in public transport. As Tim said, the Sydney Metro is actually the largest public transport project in history, and we're delivering it. We'll be delivering it in my community in Crow's Nest in North Sydney, and as we announced on the weekend, expanding it out throughout Western Sydney as well. And that's what the Liberal Party can do in leadership, is not only do we manage money, but we use it to invest in the type of infrastructure that changes lives and helps shapes the way people move around their cities and experience the world we live in. I mean, that's crucial in my area. We've got 3 major school upgrades. Tim said he's got a number in his community as well. We had 30 years without a school upgrade in North Shore until we had a Liberal government in place. And now we're actually investing in local students, but also students all across New South Wales, because that's what we do as a Liberal government. We can manage the money in order to actually spend it on the facilities and services that change our lives, where public education makes such a huge difference to all of us. So there's so many things we're already working on, and we have a really strong and positive plan for the future of New South Wales. With our leadership of Don Perrottet, we know that he's got a vision that we all ascribe to in our team to try and ensure that New South Wales keeps moving forward. I'm really positive about that. I'm excited. We've got lots of opportunities here in North Shore, but more broadly across New South Wales. So I hope to see that we return our Liberal government, and obviously myself as the member for North Shore, so I can keep working for my local community. Thanks
very much, Felicity. We also note that Larissa Penn has sent her apologies. She has told us that she will be running as a candidate in Willoughby, and she's provided a short statement which I'll read for the benefit of this audience as well as those that are watching subsequent to tonight. So I'm going to read this in the first person because this is the statement that was provided. I can assure you I'm not running for Willoughby. It was only last week that I announced that I would nominate as an independent candidate for the seat of Willoughby. I'm a true independent candidate. I'm 100% reliant on community support, both financial and on the hustings. It's a grassroots all the way. I have no big donors and I'm not a member of a party. I am with the community and for the community. I'm proud of my Jewish heritage. My great-great-grandfather was a Jewish immigrant to Australia and made a significant contribution to the Sydney we now know. Many of the photographs showing early pictures of Sydney taken by his photographic studios are displayed across the city today. So that is an extract of the statement that was provided for everybody's benefit from Larissa Penn. So thank you, candidates, for the opening statements and remarks that you have made already. You know, you've stuck to time, so we're doing very well. Now, what we're going to do is some of those themes that some of the candidates have mentioned have really come through in the questions that have been submitted. And so what I'll do now is go to some of those particular issues. And we might start with privatisation. There's been a number of questions that have been submitted on privatisation, and I might go to you, Helen, first, if you don't mind. So what is your approach, what is your position on privatisation of services? Some of the examples that have been submitted are about bus services, hospitals, and there is a particular reference to bus services from the beaches to eastern suburbs no longer existing. So what is your position on that?
Well, if I might just pick up on the transport issue firstly, going around the community, most particularly in the Mossman area, privatisation of the bus routes is a source of great angst. So what's happened, and I know there's already a report that establishes this, is that the privatisation sets out certain objectives, but then upon analysis after the privatisation takes place, it's clear those objectives have not been met. So in the case of the buses around Mossman, contracts entered into with private operators are such that those private operators can't maintain all the routes. So, for example, a very significant bus route that goes from Mossman to the inner west has been cancelled. Now that's caused an enormous amount of angst in the community, and of course it has very significant ramifications because, as the community says to me, the consultation about that was very poor. Certainly bus routes were cancelled without any consultation with the community, and it means instead of getting on a bus every morning to go to work, people are getting into their cars. That increases congestion, it increases the emissions that we are trying to reduce, so the outcome is not a desirable outcome. So I think with privatisation you've really got to look at what is the business case for it and look at all the implications of privatisation. And we have seen in some cases when services have been privatised that the quality of the service then diminishes. So for me it's all a matter of looking at what the privatisation offers, a proper examination of what the cost benefit of the privatisation might be, what is that case, and then determine after the event if that has been realised. If it hasn't been realised, you've got to revisit it. Now I see today in the paper that there's some suggestion by the Perrottet government that the only way we can afford the increased infrastructure spend is to privatise more services. Well, I'm not sure the community's in sync with that. Certainly, if you look at the financial performance of the Perrottet government, you'd have to start questioning whether or not this is the way to go. So we have a government that has huge deficits for the next 2 years. A very, very thin projected surplus for 24-25, and frankly, to get to that surplus, it will require a lot of things to line up. And we certainly have increasing debt, and we have projections of lower productivity. This is a financially incompetent government that has thrown millions at Tahi, the Transport Asset Holding Entity, to prop up a device to take the assets off the budget. We've had a government throw millions at iCare to prop up a pathetic government insurer that has incurred incredible underwriting losses and indeed had to pay $38 million to a whole lot of people whose benefits have been underpaid. We have a government here that offshores all the construction of transport infrastructure assets, so we have problems with the ferries, we have design defects in the ferries, we have trams with cracks, we have trains that are sitting in sheds because we can't get them out of the sheds because of design disputes. We have a train project where the Spanish manufacturer is demanding all sorts of things. The project now has blown out to $1 billion. So, the problem about, selling off assets has to be seen in the context of the financial competence of this government. And frankly, given the current track record, all that evidence, people would have to think very carefully about whether or not this is the government that should be entrusted with that privatisation.
So a number of comments there by Helen, and obviously a number of elements to the questions that have been asked. I might go to the government members.
I'm happy. Yeah,
Felicity, and then we'll go to Tim.
Far away.
Thanks very much. Let's try and look at some of the facts around the state's finances. Noting that we've just come through the most significant crisis and pandemic we've faced in over 100 years, and New South Wales has gotten through that. And as Helen mentions, we're still on track to have a surplus in a couple of years' time. We had our mid-year economic statement in recent weeks, which also reinforced that fact. We're the only jurisdiction in Australia with 2 AAA credit ratings, and those who understand AAA credit ratings means quite significantly that it is a positive mark against your economic management, but it also means that you have lower borrowing costs when you actually are incurring debt to fund projects. The notion that there is some kind of problem with the economic management of New South Wales might come from Helen, but it doesn't come from the facts. It doesn't come from the facts from all the independent assessments made of the New South Wales economy. And when you look at the way in which we spend money, when you look at the fact that we have over $100 billion in the forward estimates in infrastructure, when I think I heard Sarah say that Labor's committing $10 million to 2 school upgrades in Willoughby, I'm sorry, but you won't get 1 school upgrade for $10 million, let alone 2. You won't get 1 school upgrade for $20 million. It concerns me when we hear from people aspiring to politics that sometimes they don't actually understand the way that government is run and the kinds of expenses that it costs to deliver infrastructure. And some of the commentary we heard from Helen, I actually thought I was listening to the Labor Party in question time, frankly, because of the attacks on the Liberal government and the way that we've run the state. Because you all know that you've never seen the level of infrastructure investment in public transport, in schools, in hospitals, in the history of this state. We got through the pandemic because of the investment in our healthcare system for the many years leading up to the pandemic. We had the supports for small businesses. We had the supports for people who maybe had casual employment and couldn't financially afford to stay at home. We could support that because of our economic approach and policies and our economic management. For the international students that were left high and dry, we were the ones who were pushing to make sure that they had financial supports and weren't left alone struggling in their community. We're the ones who have had record levels of investment in the prevention of domestic violence and supporting women. We've got $5 billion that's just gone into the Women's Economic Opportunities package. These are the types of investments that change lives. They didn't happen under Labor. They won't happen if there is another Labor government, because we can look at the past record of Labor, and past performance is the best indicator of future performance. But when we hark on about the asset recycling program, the only reason we actually have any of this investment in New South Wales is because we've recycled our assets. If you look at WestConnex, for instance, we've taken $5 billion from that and put it in Westinvest. And Westinvest is going to change more lives in the western suburbs of Sydney. If we don't recycle our assets, all we do is hold on to assets in the long term and have no money to put into new income generating and new asset returning investments in infrastructure. And that's what Labor did, and that's what it seems to me what Helen's saying she'd support a Labor government to do if she were elected, because that's not the Liberal way of doing things. If you own an asset, if you own a house, do you just sit on that over time, or do you look at it as an investment opportunity and draw down on that equity and look to improve your financial security into the future? If you run a business, do you just sit on the asset you have, or do you try and improve upon that asset? The people of New South Wales deserve more. All Labor did in their last term of government was build half a railway line for twice the cost, and it took them twice as long as they committed to do it. What have you seen from the Liberals? We deliver time and time and again in infrastructure and services for our community. That's our economic management. That's what people can assess the facts on, and it's not the misrepresentation that you're hearing here today.
Tim, pretty comprehensive answer you want to add to that?
I'll just say in the broader sense, I mean, we all know what happened under Labor last time round. There was a massive financial disaster, there was a huge integrity deficit, an enormous infrastructure backlog, a government that was failing badly, and a government that essentially declared Sydney could not grow, doors were closed, nothing further to see, nothing further to do here. So let no one forget those facts. Now, when it comes to claims of privatisation, I'll tell you a little story. Back in the 1980s, I used to get the bus from Penshurst Street. I caught it on Macquarie Street, lived on Penshurst Street, to Chatswood Station every day to go to school. It was a Forest Coach Lines bus. Still, today, we have a Forest Coach Lines bus. It is a franchised-based model. The government still takes charge, takes responsibility and ownership of timetables, ensuring services are there. The bus companies are engaged to help to deliver those services. And these days, we all know, we see that across a raft of services. And by the way, I don't see Labor or Independents or anyone saying they're going to cancel those contracts. The policy Labor's put forward is to conduct a review. Well, we're not reviewing, we're acting on it. And the main root cause for any issues in the bus service provision at the moment is a driver shortage, which is not at all unique to this area. Indeed, it is right across Sydney. And it is not even unique to this country, it is right across the Western world. And nor is it unique to bus driving. This is one of the many flow-on effects of COVID. We see this in other sectors, teaching, nursing, policing, and so it goes on. So we are acting upon that. We are working with the bus company. I'm at that depot very regularly. I'm standing at bus stops, talking to the minister in his office and engaging as effectively as I can to get drivers into place. There are sign-on bonuses, recruitment days, all sorts of activities, and we are getting there. That backlog is getting smaller, services are improving, and we are getting on top of it. It has not been easy, and there are many other, if you like, consequences from COVID in terms of the days that people are going into the office, getting timetables right. There's an issue, for example, to give you one, in which school kids are generally not tapping on and off using their Opal card. And that makes it hard for planning and scheduling purposes, because that Opal data is used to seek to set up timetables and to get the services right. So there are many drivers and dynamics here, but the notion that we have a privatisation problem is a complete falsehood, and we should not go back to some sort of state-run bus system, because it would not be any better. Indeed, it would be worse.
Okay, well, lots of mentions of Labor. So, Sarah and Godfrey, would you like to comment? Thanks.
Thank you. Well, lots of varying views. And Helen, we welcome you into the Labor Party because you talk a lot of sense.
I'm not a member of the Labor Party.
I know you're
I'm
not,
standing for the
but
Labor
you...
Party.
Look, Felicity and Tim have skated over two big things. The spectacular failure of iCare. Every single person in New South Wales who runs a small business will be paying higher workers' compensation insurance. And I find it incomprehensible and quite obscene that the government defended the excessive bonuses to the executives who oversaw that failure, underpayment of $80 million to workers who are off work, and also the whole goal of health of workers' compensation insurance is to manage the injury and get back to work, and that was far less under that scheme. So that's an abject failure that costs every small business in New South Wales. So that is not good financial management. And I understand the points Tim made about Labor 10 years ago, but we have cleaned house. We have taken that and we've learned from it, and it was a bad time, and we are so clean. I can't take a penny of cash. It is so complicated to make a donation. We are so careful to be scrupulous in everything we do. So I understand the point Tim was making, but it is different now. Secondly, my experience talking to people on the buses is quite different from Tim. I've spoken to bus drivers who have left and that have chosen to drive garbage trucks because they get $5 more an hour. So COVID is an issue, but it's certainly not the only one. Generally, people get worse paying conditions under privatisation. We know that, and we see it in labour hire firms and segmenting the workforce under various individual contracts, and the worker always ends off worse. And the buses, it's just a productivity issue. We're talking about running a productive economy, but it's not productive when people can't get to work or they're spending more money and effort driving their cars. So, and one last thing, Helen, the Transport Entity Holding Authority? I think I've got that right. It's holding entity, that's right. We've been practicing that one. But nevertheless, I may have got the acronym wrong, that Helen was absolutely correct about how this is just going to be a burden on the budget for years to come. So I'll give Godfrey a chance because I don't want to hold the microphone.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks. I'm an economist by training, and in Economics 101, we learn a lot about monopolies and how they operate. And one of the problems with monopolies is you have this thing called a natural monopoly, where the market just cannot come in and ensure that you have the most efficient delivery of product at the best possible price. And unfortunately, I have to say that the Liberals, in their ideological perspective on these things, have forgotten that if you have monopolies running things and you sell what your asset is to a monopoly, then you're not going to get delivery of product properly. You're not going to get it at a good price. And unfortunately, there's any number of examples of that in action. Take the toll roads, for example. I mean, we are the highest tolled city in the world, and we pay prices which are absolutely outrageous to go on a road. And this is at the expense of other roads, feeder roads, which should be properly maintained. I mean, my daughter lives at Wagga, and the roads down there are absolutely atrocious at the moment, the potholes, because there's no money, because we've sold off the farm, as it were, sold off the roads to private companies. We get a one-off gain. I think Tim mentioned about owning a house. Well, if you sell a house, yes, you might make a profit on the sale, but after that, it's gone. That asset is gone. And that's the problem with the way things are at the moment. And we're experiencing that throughout the place. I mean, our concern is that the next step would be to, say, privatise Sydney Water or some other natural monopoly, which under government control at least has some form of control over the way it's operated. And this is the thing that concerns us. The way things are at the moment with the toll roads, with the destruction of the environment that's associated with the current project that's going ahead on the North Shore, that these things will be handed over to a private company with a cost-plus approach and certainly not a service delivery approach. And we're really concerned about that.
Well, thank you to our candidates. Round of applause. We got some comprehensive answers on the topic of privatisation. One of the other topics that we've had quite a number of questions on, which pertains quite specifically to the Jewish community, but other communities as well that have higher risks, is security funding, and the safety of institutions. We've been asked about commitments as well as positions on how you can boost the Jewish communal security, the security and safety of our faith institutions. What your position is, what commitment you will give, and what your understanding of that support looks like. We might start with Godfrey this time.
The Labor Party is strongly committed to ensure everyone can practice their faith safely and securely, and we will ensure that measures are taken in government to bring that about. We certainly don't wish to see invasions of private property, of religious institutions in any way. We will prevent that with a proper policing policy. We also want to ensure that religious discrimination is not practiced in this society. We have a visceral hatred of the symbols, anti-Semitic symbols, which have been portrayed by some people. We will ensure that through legislative and other policing means that we'll hold no truck for such activity. We defend religious rights completely, and also we are one of the first countries in the world which recognise the State of Israel, and we have a strong and abiding belief in the preservation of that wonderful country and the right of the Israeli people to live in a safe and secure environment. So definitely in government we will be doing whatever we can to ensure that racial discrimination is not practiced, religious discrimination is not practiced, and we will protect the values of these religious institutions.
I might just get you to follow up on that, because some of the question really focuses on the fact that a lot of communal money, specifically from our perspective, we know this is true for other communities as well, is going and being redirected away from whether it's aged care or education, so that we can have the security of those institutions. And there is a need so that that can be reinvested back in those essential services. And I'll push all of the candidates on this. What can specifically be done in order to ensure that communal funds are spent on delivering those essential services rather than securing the premises to even exist before those services take place?
Well, we have certainly in the federal sphere guaranteed money for religious cultural institutions of that kind and for aged care facilities, and we will ensure that we continue that through the state if we get into government.
Okay.
Sarah, do you want
Thanks, Godfrey. Sarah?
So I actually really regret that we have to even have that discussion, that these religious premises and that you can't feel secure. So Labor has undertaken to work constructively with the government or with the Liberal Party to make sure that funds are available for security. And we understand there's a proposal put by Dominic Perrottet that doesn't have a lot of detail at the moment, but we genuinely support the principle in general of providing appropriate security services.
Okay, so a bipartisan commitment to ensuring that that support is there. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, absolutely.
Tim?
Yeah, look, this should be above politics, and I think it is, and I think that's probably broadly how we would all see it. I mean, it's safety first, and security obviously is absolutely paramount, whether you're talking about a school, an aged care facility, a synagogue, temple, or otherwise. And my sister used to work in one of the Jewish childcare centres up in St Ives, and she personally answered the phone one day, and there was a bomb threat, and she's dealt with those circumstances and having to evacuate children and staff and so on and so forth. So I have some limited understanding of that, and that's a terrible thing that should and does still happen in the modern era. So yes, of course, it is the responsibility of government working with community to ensure that people can go about their lives with all due safety and security. That is a bottom line foundation stone. More broadly, of course, it's the responsibility of government, again, working with community, to seek to ensure that hatred, bullying, vilification, intimidation, anti-Semitism in particular, here is absolutely stamped out and is dealt with the full force of the law, and is also importantly the subject of education and engagement, proper, respectful discussion. One of the first things, as it comes to mind, that I did on becoming the member for Willoughby was to visit the Sydney Jewish Museum, and I'm glad I did that. I found that very moving. I've previously been to the Holocaust Museum in Washington DC, and some of our nearest and dearest friends are people of Jewish faith, including the wife of the man who introduced my parents. And I am full of respect for people of Jewish faith, the people of Israel. They are among the most challenged, persecuted people in this world, and I'm full of admiration for their resilience, their determination, their ambition, their innovation, their enterprise, and most of all their spirit and culture and faith, which guides them and drives them forward. And that is something I think we all share and respect in this panel, and certainly I'm committed to that as a still relatively new Member of Parliament.
Thank you. And just before we move on, one of the other related questions that we're going to get to next, and we might cover it together, you mentioned tackling anti-Semitism and some of the things that the government or MPs can do? What are some of those things? What are some of those elements that more could be done?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you one of the things that I did, and I mean, Darren, you were there and we talked about it, so you know it, but I'll let everyone know is after visiting the Sydney Jewish Museum, I wrote to all of the principals of the schools in the Willoughby electorate, 19 schools, and I said to them all, you should please encourage your staff and your students to go and visit the Sydney Jewish Museum, to see it for yourselves, to understand, to reflect, to pause, to take it in, and you too, as I did, will find it very moving and very meaningful. And I mean, that's just obviously one action. There's a lot more we can do. There are significant programs to stamp out hate and bullying. There's a significant series of programs around education in multicultural New South Wales, in schools, in a number of facets across portfolios within government, and that's a journey. And I think we all undertake that together in government, in society, in community. But I think we've made real strides forward there. Yes, there is more to do, but I think again that is something that we would all broadly share and should be, and I think generally is above politics.
Does the Department of Education have a bigger role to play?
Well, certainly. I mean, I would advocate for the Department of Education to ensure that it is well taught, well understood, and is an experience that, in my view, in my personal view, every student in New South Wales should understand and should ideally visit that Sydney Jewish Museum. And again, as I said, pause, reflect, understand, and I think that surely must help us as a community, as a society, as a nation, as a world, to ensure that those evils can never be repeated.
Thank you. Helen?
Look, I don't disagree with any of the comments. I support all the comments made. Look, we are a tolerant society in Australia, I believe. Unfortunately, however, in recent times, I think we've seen some very unfortunate incidents. So how do we deal with that? Well, I think there is a significant role for parliamentarians to show leadership. Leadership is incredibly important, so how parliamentarians behave, personally and professionally, sets a standard. Now, as a crossbencher, I would support any legislation that would help reinforce that leadership role. It's interesting, we often talk about putting an economic lens over situations, over legislation, but it does seem to me that it's terribly important to look at legislation in a much broader sense. Apply a diversity lens, an inclusion lens, a non-discrimination lens. And it's those sorts of things that parliamentarians can do to show leadership, because there are often very unintended consequences. And unless you actually very actively apply those lenses, those unintended consequences can occur. So as a crossbencher, I would certainly support leadership from the Parliament, legislation that would deal with any areas where we feel that there is discrimination against any religious group. Everybody in this community should be able to feel safe practicing whatever religion they wish to practice. That should be safeguarded by Parliament, and parliamentarians should show that leadership.
And just quickly, where there is significant investment by communal organisations and community in order to uplift that security so that they can carry out just basic and expected societal tasks, do you believe there should be government support to ensure that they have those safety parameters in place?
Well, yes, that's part of the leadership to which I'm referring.
Yeah.
That's the sort of thing that parliamentarians should show leadership in. I don't think anybody would have an issue with that, because I think we are a tolerant society. I think we do respect the fact that people have different beliefs and should be able to practice those beliefs and live in that way safely and practice those beliefs safely. And if that requires funds, they should be applied.
Thanks, Helen. Marcus?
Thank you, Darren. I just want to acknowledge that I come from a position where I don't have to live the life of a Jewish person going to a Jewish school or going to a synagogue and feeling the impacts to your safety. And I think that existential threat, not just the physical threat. I went to Israel 2016. I remember travelling through Israel and going to all the corners of Israel And what was really profound to me was how many guns were there and the realisation of why those guns were so necessary, because it's not something you see in Australia. We're so fortunate that we don't have to see it in Australia. And then travelling down to the Gaza Strip, essentially the bomb shelters, these just concrete bunkers on the sides of bus stops, on the sides of schools, and the reality of being the Jewish state is so incredibly profound when you see it and witness that. And then you kind of come home to where things are hunky-dory, and the risk is that you forget that, or you forget that it's still an ever-present threat, even in our own community, if not for me, if not for my kids, if not for my friends and family, as much as it is for others. So I think we need to not forget that. I think we need to make sure that we know that this is still a risk for us. And in recent time, we have seen those risks acted upon and threats made or action taken. I know that at Cremorne Synagogue, for instance, I worked with them to get some funding for the security upgrades they put in place in the last couple of years. I know they had quite a bit of pushback, for instance, from council around some of the physical manifestation of what security is required. So I think we actually need to, as an entire society, become much more aware that it's not an imposition on our streets seeing bollards, for instance. It's an imposition on our Jewish people that they need bollards to protect them and keep them safe. And so I still think we're working through that education understanding. Yes, Darren, you're right, we need funding. We need funding for security and safety, whether it's at synagogues or schools, for instance, and helping to defray those costs so that other services can be funded by the Jewish community, other communities. But we also need things like funding and a real focus on the way in which our society focuses on these challenges. So, you know, we've had that $6 million into the Sydney Jewish Museum in recent years. But there's more that we have to do to make sure we have education awareness, and that it's really embedded in our understandings as a society, because it's very easy to walk through our days in whichever privilege we hold, and we all have privilege of some variety, and not realise the way another person is walking through their day. So the more aware we can be, then I think the more that our society will be focused on ensuring that we make the right decisions to make sure that we have a safe and welcoming and inclusive home for everybody who lives in Australia.
Thank you. Godfrey, I'm just conscious that I introduced a question that I was actually going to ask after this in relation to the broader anti-Semitism and some of the initiatives that could be in place, whether it's with the department or in government. Did you want to touch on that before we continue? Don't have to, just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, well, just one thing that comes to mind that we could be undertaking is a community education program, or things such as what Felicity was mentioning, things like the need for bollards and why you have to need them, issues like that, to ensure that the community accepts and realises that the need. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think it was the distance, that's all.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and to ensure that the community realises the essential need for those facilities. I think that generally the community does accept that need. If there is some perception out there that they're an impediment to free flow of traffic, for example, well, something needs to be done to make sure people understand that need.
And is that a discussion as well with local councils, particularly
yes,
with...
it certainly is, and I think
and with your background...
Just speaking for our council, we certainly have no problem with such facilities being established. We would not wish to discourage these necessary security means.
Okay, excellent. And just to acknowledge, and there was a comment that came through, just to acknowledge the bipartisan and unanimous support for the Nazi symbols legislation that was passed.
Yes.
It's clearly, and on behalf of the community more broadly, a great appreciation for the protective benefits that it has. So thank you to all of you in relation to that. We might move on to the area of development, because there's also a number of questions in relation to that. And I'm conscious of time, so we'll probably be able to, we've covered those other topics so comprehensively, we might touch on this. There's a number of comments in relation to limiting population densities, particularly on the lower North Shore, but also with the representation that's currently in place at 28, it says here 28 to 30-storey buildings, replacing 4-storey buildings. This particular question actually was originally directed at Helen and Godfrey, but we'll open it up afterwards. What approach and what is your position in relation to this kind of development?
Well, it really isn't on the one hand, on the other hand issue, but as far as we're concerned, we realise that there is a necessity in this current period of where house prices are so high and availabilities are so low, especially in our area, which is primarily a service-based industry area, and it's health and education primarily. And we have a lot of workers who are in those two sectors, which are at the lower end of the pay scales generally, that finding themselves unable to live in the area that they work in. And so we realise that there is a need for development of affordable housing to allow these people to come and live in the areas that they work in. We are a small, the council area, for example, that I'm under, the council area is only 10 square kilometres with over 80,000 people living in it, and it's already a high density area. We don't have a problem with medium to high density as long as the facilities are established, the infrastructure is established to enable people to live a decent life, the public space, the public transport, the decent roads, the shops, schools, hospitals. Unfortunately, that hasn't been the case up to now. There's been unbridled development without consideration of proper infrastructure. A couple of weeks ago, we were holidaying in Singapore, my wife and I, and the Singaporeans have an attitude quite different from us. When they have high-rise developments, and they have, I mean, you know, they've got over 6 million people living in an area not much larger than the city to Bondi in size, and they have a very strict set of rules for the establishment of medium to high-rise density buildings to ensure that there is adequate infrastructure and people can live a decent lifestyle who live in those buildings. And I think that's an attitude that we have. We also do have in the North Shore area places where people live in charming 2-bedroom heritage cottages, and they see progressively, only a few metres away, enormous high-rise buildings going up and overshadowing them and undermining their lifestyle. So there's that issue too.
We might just keep it.
Right.
If we
So
can,
essentially, that would be our attitude towards high-rise and medium density. We need to ensure that people can live near where they work, and unfortunately, not enough is done in the North Sydney area at the moment, the North Shore area, to ensure that is the case.
Thank you very much, Godfrey. Helen?
Look, in the interest of time, I will keep it brief. Look, I think it's fair to say that people accept in an urbanised environment there needs to be a level of development. But the fundamental problem is that the planning system is completely and utterly broken. It is the most complained about issue in the North Shore electorate as I walk around and talk to people. Doesn't matter whether I'm in Mosman or in Waverton, Wollstonecraft, North Sydney. It is an area of great concern. There seem to be some very significant issues. Firstly, the system centralises power into the government. Developers have an extraordinary amount of power. There's no proper strategic planning around development, so the infrastructure that's necessary to support development is not put in place. And frankly, the community consultation is extremely poor. So there are very, very significant problems with the planning system. That's what the community is saying. So there needs to be a change. So a crossbench, a strong crossbench would drive a change in the planning system, a fundamental review of the planning system, because it is clearly not meeting the community's needs.
Okay, thank you, Helen. Would you, Tim or Felicity or Sarah, like to comment briefly?
So there's no question there are some genuine well-held concerns out there on matters of development. It is not easy when we have urban growth, but we cannot stand still. We cannot sort of dig our heels in and say Sydney is full, enough is enough. The key in our view, is to ensure that we get the balance right, to ensure that development is focused upon and can occur in those areas where we are able to deliver those essential services. So in the Willoughby electorate, to give it some local context, much of the growth, as in development, is in and around St Leonard's and Crow's Nest or Chatswood. And the reason for that is that both of those areas will have a metro station opening early next year, and the capacity of people in that community to move around will be significantly uplifted by a very regular, reliable metro service. At the same time, it's no secret, as you heard me say before, that we are committed to building 2 new schools, likewise in those same 2 areas. So we take our responsibility to deliver government services and infrastructure very seriously and seek to go about a level of coordination and planning, working with local councils and working with people and communities too, of course, to get that balance right, to enable growth, to help to meet the challenges of a city of 6 million people where so many people around the world would love to live, and where you do see extraordinary demand for real estate. So that's our position. I note that Chris Minns has said that Lane Cove and Mossman have not met their fair share of development, so I think the Labor message is quite clear actually, that you will see a significant uplift in development on the North Shore of Sydney, and at the same time Labor's track record in these areas when it comes to government services and infrastructure is largely of doing nothing. So if you choose to vote Labor and or independent, then chances are you'll get a lot more development and little or no government services, to put it bluntly. But we take our responsibilities very seriously on those matters of development and are working to seek to get the balance right.
I might give the final word to Sarah if you'd like it.
Well,
I'll go.
Obviously.
I like the last word. Labor has a commitment to any excess public land or Crown land near metro stations will be 30% affordable housing, because if we don't commit to this sort of development, all the services that we rely on that make our life better won't be there. I've spoken to aged health workers who are travelling 2 hours each way to get to their $25 an hour job. So we need to balance development. We need to take control of development over these metro sites, and I note that the dive site at Chatswood on the corner of Mowbray Road and Pacific Highway, there's an ad in the paper that there's an expression of interest, seeking expressions of interest to buy that land, talking about a mixed development including a school. I just don't understand the reasoning about that. Under Labor, we would consider keeping that land in public hands, and any development would include 30% affordable housing. So it is a conundrum. You know, no one wants to be a NIMBY. Well, actually we all want to be NIMBYs, but we can't all be NIMBYs or we'll never get anything built. But infrastructure and development has to be thoughtful, it has to be aligned with the metro station. Metro is a great project, we support it, and development needs to be done thoughtfully around these areas. And I'll stop now.
Okay, thank you. And Felicity.
Thank you, Darren. There's probably many things we'll agree on because we've chosen to make our homes in these communities. So I imagine we all love them. And my electorate is an incredibly dense electorate. It's been dense for a really long time. You've got all these beautiful 60s and 70s apartment blocks that have been built up back in the day, and then more modern density. And that's part of the vibrancy. If you look at Kirribilli, for instance, it's vibrant, it's fun, there's a lot of character and atmosphere and a diversity of people. You get owners and renters and people who have come from overseas, and it's a real part of the joy of our community. It's one of the reasons I live there. And as I said earlier, now I live in an apartment, I'm a renter, we've got a lot of people in my community. About half of our community are renting, and about half of the community are in strata. So that's how many people are living in apartments and townhouses in the electorate of North Shore. And we've also got this big squeeze, the rental squeeze. We've got people are going to come off this fixed term interest rate cliff. People are really worried about interest rates and worried about inflation. And so we're in this in between where we want to make sure we maintain that beautiful character of the communities that we love and we've chosen to call home. But we also need housing. We desperately need housing supply. We need something that's more affordable for the people that Sarah talked about as well, but also the people who already live in these communities. So it is a real challenge to get it right. And it seems like we all agree on two premises, if I may say. One is that you have to do it right. So you need the right design, you need the right strategic planning. And the second is that you need the services and facilities and amenities to ensure the community still prospers. I think we probably agree on those, and where we differ is whether we think that's happening or whether we think that will happen more appropriately under a Liberal government or a Labor government. And I've just got to say, when we came into government, the Liberal government came in, you've got to remember back to Part 3A, to the way in which planning was run in New South Wales by Labor, to the fact that the minister could just, with the stroke of a pen, issue decisions that would put any kind of planning and development outcome in any community. And as Tim mentioned, we've got Chris Minns, and it's not Godfrey's fault that his leaders thrown him under the bus with this one, but we've got Chris Minns saying, put more density in Mossman, and I think Tim mentioned somewhere else, but even in just last week he said to double the density in Crow's Nest, for instance. So you've got a Labor team and a leadership that has already told our community what they think of the look and feel of our community. They haven't done any strategic planning about whether it's appropriate to put that density or height in our community, but they're saying they'll do it anyway without even talking to us or giving us a voice and making sure that our villages continue to thrive. And you've also got that choice between Liberal and Labor about who will actually deliver the amenities, facilities and services that you need. But before I was elected, we already had two brand new schools in my community, Camaragal High School and Anzac Park Public, built under the Liberal Party, and now we've got major upgrades of 3 schools. As I said, that has never happened before. We've got the metro coming through. We introduced the B line. We've increased bus services, ferry services, train services, the kinds of investment you need to call the dense area like North Shore home. Those things weren't happening under Labor, and they won't happen under Labor. And it's not Godfrey's fault that they won't happen under Labor. It's Chris Minns' fault, and it's the decisions that Labor take, but it's also their inability to actually manage dollars to deliver outcomes. The earlier conversation that we were having about the notion of privatisation, and Godfrey said, well, we want to hold on to Sydney Water. Chris Minns said last week that they think they can fund their entire infrastructure investment scheme on the one odd $1 billion of dividends from Sydney Water every year. That's $1 billion a year versus over $100 billion we're spending in 4 years. You really can't trust what they say, and we know that what they'll do is dump density in our communities that's not good density, it's not good for our communities. So the choice at the end of the day is between the Liberals who are really trying to reform our planning system but also deliver the local amenities and services we need, and Labor whose track records show they're bad at planning and they're bad at delivering any services or amenities.
Well, on that note, we're going to move...
Sorry, could I just say that Chris Minns won't be throwing me under the bus, he'll be ensuring that I've got a bus to catch.
I do wonder, Godfrey, whether you do catch the bus, because I catch the bus most days and I love our bus services, and I think our community loves our bus services.
Look, the good news is that we're going to move into closing statements, and Felicity, you're up first. So if I can just ask each candidate to keep to the 2 minutes so that we keep to time. Felicity.
Well, I want to start by saying thank you, and I think that the questions that we've received this evening are the same questions that are going through our communities and that I'm listening to every single day, and that I've spent my recent years in Parliament working really hard on. It's about making sure that we get the right outcomes for our community around local investments, local services, but also on some of the big issues about how do we make tough decisions? How do we make tough decisions about where to allocate funding? How to make tough decisions about what type of services to prioritise, because we can't do everything at once. But one of the areas we didn't touch on, which I wanted to comment on if I may, was really around one of the big changes we've seen in recent years, and that's investment in parklands and open space. And it's something I've really been championing, which I think is so crucial to our community. The kinds of investments we've had in the National Park at Middlehead, the contiguous walking tracks, the restoration of the military fortifications, the brand new parks we've opened, Northcliffe Park, that we purchased that land and turned it into a park, the Holterman Street car park in Crow's Nest we're going to put underground so we can build a brand new park. The Park and Plaza we're building at Salem, it's over the rail line. It's an innovative new approach. The Lavender Bay High Line we announced on the weekend, over 3 kilometres of public parkland and active walkway, and then Berries Bay, which has been locked up following a Labor lease from the community for a decade or more than a decade actually, which we're finally returning to our community. These are the types of things that some people think investing in open space and parklands is kind of pie in the sky, but it's actually really within my DNA. These are the spaces I use. They're the lungs of our community. And we haven't touched on that really tonight. And I want to make sure people are aware of how crucial that is in the things people say to me, but also what we're doing as a government in our community. And we haven't seen it before with Labor governments. So I just want to reflect in closing that you can look at our past records. Dominic Perrottet has a past record of his delivery. He's put himself on the line out there. He's making tough decisions. He's ensuring, he reintroduced integrity into the grant schemes. He made sure that he stood up against invested interest for pokey reform. He's doing all of these different initiatives to ensure we get great outcomes for our community, short and long term. And you've also seen that we have the most ambitious climate change targets in the country, for instance. But you can also look at my track record locally, not just the things I've delivered, but the things I've stood up for and been a voice on. So please check that out or talk to me. I'm always happy to hear your views or answer your questions. Thanks, Darren.
Okay, thank you, Felicity. Godfrey.
Thank you, Darren. One of the things I've just found intriguing is talking about parklands, and I look at Camray Park and the loss of 10 hectares plus of beautiful parkland, mature trees that we'll never see again. And as far as we're concerned, we certainly will not be reducing parkland in North Sydney. We will be reinstating and restoring. Also, I want to make a point about this question of outsourcing of so many government contracts to foreigners. Again, I'm an economist. I say I'm an economist, and I firmly believe in the multiplier effect and the loss of that multiplier effect by not having locals produce products that we need, the buses, the ferries, the trains, and the fact that you can have what we call a 5-to-1 multiplier effect within an industry if we produce those things ourselves. We've got things that we did make ourselves, like the Tangara train, still running very nicely, no problems at all, maintained well, and yet the foreign things seem to break down before they even get into operation. If you have a system whereby you award contracts simply on the basis of lowest cost on the bid, then you have things like this occurring. And if you don't incorporate in your tendering system an allowance for multiplier effect for the local industry that's developed and all the purchasing that people who produce here would pass on, then you have the situation occurring that we've had with our public transport problems. I certainly would want to ensure that we overcome that problem, and I know my leader Chris Minns is certainly pushing that. Another thing is I have to talk about local government. From my own experience in council, it has been very frustrating. We go through the rigmarole of having council elections and they're just as involved as this election. And then we find that basically we're being treated not much better than a state government department. Our finances are controlled. If we knock back a DA, the developer will go around us to the local planning panel with people appointed by the government, and they sit in camera. We just get redacted minutes from that. And if sometimes they agree with the decision we've made in council, and then that goes up, it might go to Land and Environment Court or a gateway determination, and the project can go ahead anyway. There is very little community input these days as it is through the councils like there used to be. That third tier of government should be treated as a third tier of government and given the respect that it deserves.
Thank you, Godfrey. Helen?
Look, my main concern is the community of North Shore. What I've heard tonight sounds a bit like a fairy tale to me. As some of my community say to me, this government's out of touch with reality. They're living in a parallel universe. What I've heard tonight is just a complete repetition of the brochures we get from the government that tell us everything they've done, much of which they haven't done. They take credit for things they haven't done. They repeatedly announce things. Berries Bay, that's been announced 3 times probably in the last month. the High Line, it will never happen. As the Department of Transport says, Transport for New South Wales says, not in our lifetime. So we've been gaslit by this government. The brochures we get, what I've heard tonight, sounds like a very good narrative from a public relations agency. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in what the community is telling me. And what the community is telling me sounds nothing like what I've heard tonight. There's been some suggestion that I'm some sort of Labor flunky, I think, tonight. I'm an independent. I was approached by the community in North Shore to stand. And I've agreed to stand as a community independent because I'm a captive of the community. I'm not a captive of a party platform, party factions, or strong vested interests that control the current government. Politics is broken. It needs to be done differently. I have a reputation for high standards of personal and professional integrity and a track record of getting the job done, and that's what I'll do. That's what a strong crossbench can do. The current system in New South Wales is broken, and you need a strong and large crossbench to hold the government of the day to account.
Thank you very much, Helen. Tim.
Well, thanks everyone. I think tonight's been terrific, and I thank you once again for hosting us. Well done to my fellow panellists. Government is not easy, and it's meant to be a real challenge in which you must reflect a range of views across the community and make some hard decisions. You cannot be in public life all things to all people. And in the end, the question here is, do you want a government that is getting on with the job, that has a real track record of investing in New South Wales, building the infrastructure, the schools, the roads, the hospitals, the public transport, and managing the budget through a really difficult period, as we all know we have been through in recent times. And at the same time, a government with heart that is focused upon improving the circumstances and lives of the homeless, of those affected by domestic violence, of those of every background, of all people of faith. And as I say that, one of the best things I've done as the member for Willoughby is to host a forum of faith leaders, and 25 faith leaders from across Willoughby came along, and we spent almost 2 hours together across every faith. I'm proud to say Julia was there, and thank you again, Julia, for coming. And we talked about the role of churches in civil society, in community, in the provision of services, whether it be schools, hospitals, aged care, and so it goes on. And I want to once again recognise the enormous contribution and enterprise and hard work of people of Jewish faith. Now, the alternative is in Willoughby, basically, let's stop building, let's stop projects, let's stop growing, let's stop investing. I don't think, with all due respect to Larissa and Sarah, I don't think that that is the message that the people of Willoughby want to hear. They are enterprising, smart, driven, ambitious individuals. They want, in my view, a local member who is listening, consulting and serving their interests. But I think most of all they want a government that can and will get on with the job to ensure we have the government services, facilities and infrastructure that we need today and for our children and for our children's children. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Tim. Sarah.
First of all, I never said we shouldn't invest in Willoughby, so I have to correct that statement from Tim. But actually, I'd like to talk quickly about two things. I cannot let Felicity's statement stand that Dominic Perrottet has integrity on grants. We just heard last week of the quite obscene pork barrelling after the Black Summer fires, where no Labor electorates received any fast-track funding, even though they were the worst affected electorates. So John Barilaro intervened to make that happen. Dominic Perrottet oversaw that as Treasurer, and Gladys Berejiklian was Premier. Secondly, there's another thing I'd like to mention that hasn't been brought up tonight. The Anti-Discrimination Act was brought in by Neville Wran in 1977, and it's clearly not fit for purpose. Within 100 days of a Labor government, we will refer that to the Law Reform Commission with the explicit instructions that we look at anti-discrimination for religious beliefs. So that is a rock-solid promise. And actually, what I'd like to say you know, being new to politics, first time standing. This is my first candidate event, but it is such a pleasure. I know that all my fellow candidates do truly hold the welfare of their community at heart. We have very different ways of getting there, and I want to say thank you so much for having us here and being so quiet and polite and coming up with such excellent questions. No heckling whatsoever. Thank you.
We're very pleased to be the first candidate for Sarah. Can I have another round of applause, please? Look, tonight was a fantastic discussion on key issues for the Jewish community, but more broadly for society. And we thank you for your participation. And we also thank those that are watching online. Again, you'll see this next to a whole range of series of videos as part of our election series, and we thank you for your participation. On behalf of our President, David Ossip, myself, and the entire board, thank you for making the journey tonight. We hope that you got a lot out of it, and that it's helped inform your decision making. If you scan the QR code that's on your chair, or next to it, or under it, it will now turn into a survey about tonight's, very important. So it's multi-purpose, and we save paper, of course, but scan it again and you'll now get a survey and to tell us how valuable this was. So please fill that out. Just quickly, we look forward to seeing you on the 22nd of February, where we host the Premier Dominic Perrottet in Parramatta for a faith group's town hall. We look forward to your participation, and we thank you again for coming tonight. Good night.